Do you believe trauma runs in families like a pattern or breaks with you?
Are you ready for a shocking truth? For years, without telling anyone, I quietly kept my brother's household from tipping over. I covered the small gaps, paid the late fees, made sure the school never kicked his kids out of after-school programs, and stepped in every time something came close to falling apart. Then, one week before the holidays, my brother looked me straight in the eye, smirked, and said I was not invited because I would ruin the vibe. He laughed, and everyone else at the table chuckled nervously, as if it were just a joke. I nodded, smiled like it was nothing, and decided in that moment I was done playing the background sponsor in a family that could laugh at my expense. Driving home, I kept replaying his laugh. It was not just careless, it was mocking, as though all the ways I had been holding his life together were worthless, invisible, or even pathetic. I thought about the list of things that automatically drained from my bank account every month, the extra line on my phone plan that gave him cheap service, the recurring grocery card that showed up like clockwork, the monthly soccer fees that magically never went overdue, the streaming bundle everyone enjoyed at his house, but that ran under my name, and the times I paid off balances at the after-school program so the kids did not end up sitting alone in the gym. There were also the late-night rides, the surprise babysitting sessions, the times I skipped plans so I could be the backup plan for them. I had turned into the emergency credit card, the invisible third parent, the fixer no one thanked. That night, I sat down and quietly flipped switches. I logged into my wireless account and shut off the extra line. I opened the grocery card account and canceled the automatic top-up. I pulled my card information from the after-school program and set a clear instruction that only Ethan and Kelly's names could be used for future charges. I canceled the recurring soccer fee payment. I even reset the password for my streaming account and unchecked every device that was not mine. I wrote one short, calm text to Ethan. I am stepping back. Handle your own accounts going forward. No anger, no lecture, no sarcasm. Just a clean line in the sand. At first, I felt a wave of guilt. I could already imagine Ava crying when the cartoon stopped mid-episode or Max getting embarrassed when his coach asked about unpaid fees. But then I remembered the way Ethan laughed, the way he dismissed me like I was disposable, and I reminded myself that I was not punishing the children. I was simply putting the responsibility back in the hands of their parents. If they wanted to play big happy family without me, then they could also handle what I had been covering for them without me. The next morning, my phone lit up with notifications. Missed calls from Kelly. A string of half-typed angry texts from Ethan that stopped and started. My mom's number flashing in between, probably trying to smooth things over as she always did. I did not answer. I had decided the night before that silence would be my new language, and every automatic payment I had canceled would do the talking for me. By midday, I finally picked up one call from the after-school program, and that was the moment it all clicked. The woman on the line said, "Hi Lauren, we just wanted to check. The payment for December didn't go through, and since you're listed as the responsible party, could you update your card?" My heart sank and hardened at the same time. Even after I removed my card online, I was still the first name they called. That meant I had been written into their paperwork as the responsible adult for my brother's children. Not Ethan. Not Kelly. Me. I took a breath and answered clearly, "Please remove me from all accounts and lists. Ethan and Kelly are the only responsible parties now. I will not be covering any future balances." The woman hesitated, apologized, and said she would make the change. I thanked her and hung up. My hands were steady. That single phone call told me everything. For years, without even noticing, I had let myself become this safety net everyone assumed would always be there. Teachers, coaches, after-school staff, they all saw me as the fixer, the one who handled the fallout when Ethan and Kelly came up short. It had gotten so normal that no one even thought to question it. Until now. I sat back, let out a slow breath, and realized that this was only the beginning. Because if the school had me listed as the default, I could only imagine how many other places had my name penciled in as the backup adult. And once I started removing myself, the cracks were going to show fast. The truth was about to walk into their lives, and it was not going to be quiet. By the next afternoon, the consequences rolled in with the kind of rhythm that tells you this was never one bad comment at a table, but a system of habits that had learned to lean on me. Because first came the stream of notifications about logins from unknown devices on my account that I had already locked. Then the call from my mother, who used that soft voice she saves for delicate matters as if careful tone could turn an insult into a misunderstanding. And finally, the clipped message from my brother sent from Kelly's phone, where he wrote that the cartoon froze mid-episode and that the kids were upset and that I should fix it because it was the holidays. And in that stitched-together moment, it became obvious that my place in their world had been defined not by love or respect, but by reliable access to my time, my money, and my passwords. I let the phone buzz itself quiet before calling my mother back, and when she asked me to please not make things dramatic, I kept my voice even and said that nothing about this was dramatic, that it was simply the truth coming into daylight. And that since I was not invited because I apparently ruined their vibe, I had taken that message seriously and stepped back from every role I had been performing in silence for years. She tried the usual line about just a joke and you know your brother, and I said that I did know my brother, which is precisely why I was done, and that I would not be throwing a tantrum or writing a manifesto in the group chat. That I was only ending a pattern where I did the work and wore the blame while everyone else enjoyed the benefits. When Ethan finally got me on the phone, he did not yell, which would have almost been easier to hear. Instead, he spoke with that weary condescension he uses at work on people he thinks should already understand him. And he said that if I wanted to make a point, I had made it, and now could I please restore the line and turn the streaming back on because the kids were melting down. And also the school was asking about the after-school balance, and surely I did not want to make a scene in front of the office staff. I counted a breath and answered that there was no point being made, only a boundary being installed, and that the streaming, the phone, the fees, and the late-night rescues were his and Kelly's to handle because they belonged to their household. And that if a cartoon freezing created a meltdown, then perhaps that was a good invitation to talk with the kids about grown-up responsibilities rather than calling the person who was left out of the holiday on purpose. He scoffed and said this was petty, and I said that nothing about managing my own accounts is petty, that I had been subsidizing his calm for years, and he had paid me with a joke in front of our parents, and that the exchange rate was no longer acceptable. I hung up before he could wind himself into a speech and wrote a single clear email to both him and Kelly, copying my mother and father so no one could claim ignorance later, and in it I stated that I was not available for financial coverage, balance transfers, last-minute pickups, or account troubleshooting, that any true emergency regarding the children should go to 911 or their pediatrician, and that all other requests must be handled within their household by their own budget and schedule. I added that I expected the after-school program to contact them directly going forward, and that I had already removed myself from their payer list and from any default contact status that had crept onto forms without my informed consent. It felt clinical to write it that way, almost like drafting a policy at work, yet I realized that family who treats you like a utility will only understand you when you start speaking like one, with terms and conditions spelled out instead of implied. Kelly called within minutes, and where Ethan had been sharp, she was breathless and apologetic, insisting that she had not known I was covering the soccer fees automatically, and that the grocery card felt like a gift, not an obligation, and that she did not realize my name was the first line on the after-school sheet because the director had asked for an additional contact when the kids first started and Ethan had put me down, and she had assumed it was fine since we were close. She said the kids loved me and that this was hurting them most of all, and that if I could please just roll things back for this month, they would figure out a plan in January. I told her I believed she loved the kids and I loved them too, and that I would never target them, which is exactly why I refused to keep cushioning two adults from the cost of their own choices, because love that feeds a fire is not love at all but kindling. And I was done being wood. She went quiet, and then she cried in a way that felt less manipulative than truly overwhelmed, and she said something that cut through my own certainty and made me sit down. A past due notice had arrived for a medical balance from last year, and the office was calling to process the card on file, which, she admitted in a cracked whisper, was mine. And she had assumed I had left it there on purpose since I had paid once before when they could not, and she was terrified that collections might come for them because she had no idea how to fix it. I had not known my card was still sitting in a folder at that office, quietly ready to be charged again like some standing order that no one had asked me about, and I felt the heat rise in my chest, not at Kelly, but at the casual way a temporary kindness had been converted into a permanent arrangement without a single explicit conversation. I told her to give me the billing office number and that I would remove my card immediately because no one had permission to store it, and I said that if there was a balance to be handled then Ethan and Kelly needed to call and set up a payment plan in their own names, and that I would not be the guarantor who kept their credit score from feeling the reality of their spending anymore. She asked if I was really going to let their score take a hit, and I answered that I was not letting anything happen, that I was choosing to step out of the role I had been playing, and that consequences which find adults are not punishments from me, but results of their own timeline meeting the limits they have avoided. After I hung up, I called the office, confirmed my card on file, demanded its removal, and requested a written note in their system that my information could not be used under any circumstance in the future. And while the staff member processed the change, she tried to chat about the holidays and said she hoped the family was excited for travel, and I replied that everyone would be spending time exactly where they were invited, which was the first moment all day that made me smile without bitterness. I put the phone down and felt a clarity that was almost physical, a sense that nothing I had done was cruel, that it was only the natural shape of a boundary finally allowed to exist. I made tea, opened my laptop, and drafted one more message, this time to the director of the after-school program, thanking her for calling earlier and stating plainly that any future calls about balances or pickups should go to Ethan and Kelly first, and that I was not available as the backup payer or emergency driver, and that my name should appear nowhere on forms except as a relative allowed to be contacted if the parents could not be reached after multiple attempts. I asked for a confirmation in writing and a stamped copy for my records, and while that may sound cold, I have learned that the only language that outlives denial is the paper trail. My phone buzzed again, and I let it sit face down until the vibration stopped, and when I finally turned it over there was a single new message from Kelly, not a demand or a replay of Ethan's argument, but a simple line that told me we were about to step into a part of the story I had not expected. She had just discovered that the corporate discount on their wireless plan belonged to my employee account, and the carrier warned that the discount would disappear at the next billing cycle unless the sponsor reauthorized it, which meant their costs were about to jump, and she wanted to know if I had done that on purpose as payback or if it was a mistake I might be willing to fix. When I read Kelly's message about the corporate discount expiring and watched how quickly a perk that had floated in the background for years became an emergency now that it threatened their monthly bill, I realized that nothing I had done was small. It was simply invisible by design, and that invisibility had been convenient for everyone until the moment the bill arrived with my name quietly erased from the sponsor line. So I wrote back that nothing was done as payback, that the discount existed because I had registered them under my employee program back when they could not afford a new plan after a job change, that it had always required annual reauthorization, and that this year I would not be reauthorizing because I had stepped out of that role entirely. And I added that their carrier had already confirmed the policy change and that future costs were theirs to handle because only the account holder should decide the price they pay. She typed, stalled, and then called me, and the sound on the other end was not rage but a tired fear that makes people small. Because she said she had always appreciated the help yet felt trapped between a husband who treated my boundaries like an insult and a reality in which the entire scaffolding of their household rested on things they never had to budget for. From discounted phones to after-school to groceries that arrived in gift card form on the first Sunday of every month, and she asked whether I could at least keep the discount through the holidays so that the transition felt survivable. I told her that I understood the panic, that I did not hate her, and that I would not humiliate her by turning this into a public spectacle, but that I would also not be the quiet sponsor anymore, because generosity without respect becomes a leash. And I had decided to stop wearing it. Then I promised something else that mattered to me more than any plan or perk, which was that whatever I Moved out of their reach, I would replace with a structure that protected only the children and could not be siphoned by anyone, not even by accident. Before she could answer, my brother flooded the family group chat with a story so slanted it nearly slid off the screen, saying I was punishing children, that I had yanked phones during a school week, that I was cutting off essential services out of spite because I did not get my way, and that everyone needed to understand how unstable I had become. As I watched the first pings of extended family appear with little bubble hearts and awkward questions that carried more curiosity than concern, I felt the old impulse to justify myself with a long thread about context and time and unpaid invoices, and I chose a different route that would resist theatrics and yet leave no oxygen for lies. So I posted a single paragraph made of simple lines that named what I had paid during the last few years with no adjectives and no heat, items like after-school balances covered in the spring and fall, soccer fees paid on schedule so the kids could stay on the team, a grocery card refilled monthly, a phone line carried on my plan, a streaming bundle shared under my login, a medical balance at a pediatric office paid once and never agreed to again, and a handful of late fees reversed when a deadline slipped. I then attached a few thank you texts from Kelly that did not embarrass her, muted the chat, and put my phone face down. The silence lasted less than a minute because my mother called whispering as if loud words could wake more trouble. And she asked whether it was true that I had been putting money aside for the kids, and if so, why I had never told anyone, and whether I intended to use that money to control the family. And although the suspicion stung, I understood that rumors invent motives when truth is finally spoken. So I answered that I had set nothing aside that belonged to Ethan or to her, that any future help would be placed in custodial education accounts that only the children could benefit from, that I was done transferring cash into a household where kindness was treated like a faucet that could be turned on by insults and off by apologies, and that if she cared about the children's dignity, then she should be relieved that I was building a channel that no adult could treat like an allowance. I hung up and sent one message to Human Resources at my company requesting formal removal of all friends and family discounts tied to my employee account, along with a note that no reactivation should occur without a written request from me. And while I waited for the confirmation, I opened the carrier portal and removed my name from anything that resembled sponsorship, because permanence lives in systems more than in conversations, and I wanted no lingering switches that someone could flip. Without my consent, then I archived the confirmation emails in a folder labeled Boundaries so that if anyone decided to reinvent the story later, I could answer with documentation instead of debate. My brother, predictably, did not enjoy documentation, and when he realized I was not engaging in the chat, he turned to direct voice messages that came in bursts, where he accused me of enjoying the chaos and threatened to take me to small claims court for promise support, and when I asked him to forward the written promise he referenced, he sent a screenshot of a text from years ago where I said I would help with after school until you two are steadier, which is not a contract but a snapshot of a season that had lasted far too long, so I replied with a single sentence stating that temporary help is not a lifetime guarantee and that he should consult a lawyer if he believed otherwise, because I would happily provide the full thread to anyone who needed context. Kelly, meanwhile, messaged me a quiet thank you for not dragging her in front of the extended family and asked whether the medical office had confirmed my card's deletion. And when I sent her the letter from the billing department noting that my information had been removed and that future charges must be authorized by the account holders, she wrote that she felt both relieved and terrified. And I told her that both feelings were appropriate, since relief belongs to truth and terror belongs to the moment before new habits are born, and that if she and Ethan chose to build a real budget, then the terror would fade and the kids would feel safer because the adults would finally be carrying the weight themselves. By evening, I had the HR confirmation in my inbox, the carrier's acknowledgement queued behind it, and a set of red receipts on the group chat that told me everyone had seen my plain list and my refusal to wrestle in public. And I brewed one more cup of tea and thought about how many times I had told myself that staying quiet was kinder, that making my help invisible spared pride and avoided conflict, and I realized that invisibility had not been kindness at all. It had been an eraser that scrubbed my labor out of the story so completely that removal looked like aggression rather than like an adult stepping out of unpaid work. The day was almost done when my mother texted a final line that felt like a preview of something more complicated than discounts and data plans, because she wrote that a cousin had mentioned college funds at Thanksgiving, and that Ethan was now telling everyone I had set money aside for the kids that I was dangling like a leash, and she asked me to call her because she needed to know whether any of that was true before she said the wrong thing to the wrong person. And as I stared at those words, I understood that the rumor mill had moved from bills to legacy, which meant the next conversation would not be about a Frozen cartoon, but about who gets to claim future hope and who gets to hold the keys. When my mother asked if the rumor was true, whether I had tucked away money for the children that I was now flaunting as leverage, I realized just how quickly Ethan had shifted from defending himself to twisting the narrative so that I looked like the manipulative one, and while part of me wanted to scream about the absurdity of it, I knew that the only way to survive this family storm was to stay calm, keep the focus where it belonged, and move quietly in ways that no rumor could erase. Because evidence lasts longer than gossip. I told my mother that if she wanted to know the truth, then she should hear it from me directly, and I explained that I had never once held money over Ethan or Kelly. That what I had decided instead was to set up custodial accounts where every deposit was sealed for the children's education, books, or emergencies directly tied to their lives, and that the accounts were structured in such a way that not a single dollar could be withdrawn by a parent desperate to cover rent or buy a new television. I made sure she understood that this was not a leash, not a power play, and certainly not a punishment, but rather the only form of help I could now give with a clean conscience, because it bypassed the adults entirely and ensured that the children did not suffer for mistakes they had no part in making. The relief in her voice was genuine, but so was the hesitation, because she said that Ethan was telling everyone I had weaponized my financial stability to humiliate him, and that people were starting to wonder if I was trying to turn the children against their own parents by presenting myself as the savior. I answered that I did not need to be anyone's savior, that I had spent too many years patching holes with duct tape while Ethan boasted about his independence, and that my decision was not about glory, but about finally refusing to throw money into a bottomless pit where gratitude never landed. I told her plainly that if Ethan wanted to accuse me, he could do so, but that eventually he would have to show receipts, and that mine were already organized. Later that night I went online, set up 2 custodial education accounts under the children's names, deposited a modest starter sum into each, and automated a small monthly transfer. Not enough to bankrupt me, but enough to build over time into something meaningful. I printed the account statements, signed the custodian agreements, and then called an old friend who works as a notary, asking her to meet for coffee and stamp the documents so no one could claim I had fabricated the accounts later. It may have seemed extreme to cover myself with this kind of paperwork, but in families like mine, where stories mutate faster than truth can keep up, documentation is armor, and I had finally learned to stop walking into battle unshielded. The next day Ethan tried a new tactic, sending me a long message where he claimed I had promised ongoing support, that he had relied on my stability when planning their household budget, and that pulling it away now was financial sabotage. He even threatened to take me to court for damages caused by my sudden withdrawal, as if kindness could be retroactively converted into legal obligation. I did not argue with him. Instead, I replied with a scanned copy of my notary-stamped custodial agreements and a note that read, "Any help I provide will go to the children directly. Any harassment should be sent via email only. Any lies will be answered with documentation." The message was cold, and I intended it that way, because warmth had been wasted on him too many times. Kelly, caught in the middle, called again, her voice cracking as she admitted that she did not know how to manage Ethan's pride, that she wanted to thank me for securing something for Ava and Max, and that she also feared what Ethan might do if he felt cornered. I told her that I was not trying to corner anyone, only to stop living as their unpaid safety net, and that if Ethan wanted to spin stories, then she had a choice. She could either feed them with silence or refuse them with truth. She sighed and said she was tired, and I believed her, but exhaustion does not erase responsibility, and I ended the call reminding myself not to rescue her from the consequences of choosing him again and again. For a few days, there was quiet, and I thought maybe the storm had passed, but then I received a call from a distant cousin who asked bluntly whether it was true that I had frozen the holiday accounts, and whether I was planning to embarrass Ethan publicly at Christmas. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the rumor had grown legs and was now sprinting through the family grapevine, mutating into something theatrical when the reality was simple. I had stopped paying for things that were never mine to pay for in the first place. I told my cousin that there were no holiday accounts, that the only funds I had were for the children and untouchable by the parents, and that if Ethan wanted to present himself as a victim of generosity, then he could go ahead. But I would not play that game anymore. It was around this time that Ethan escalated again, sending a text that said he would go public with how I had undermined him unless I restored some of the support, and I recognized the language of desperation dressed up as bravado. I responded with a single screenshot of our old messages showing his thank yous when I covered fees, paired with the line, "Public is welcome to see the truth." After that, he fell silent for a day, and then my phone pinged with something unexpected, a message from Ava, sent from her school iPad. She asked if she had done something wrong, if I was angry at her, because Daddy kept saying your aunt is punishing us, and she did not understand what she had done to deserve that. Reading those words was like having the air punched out of me, because it was proof that Ethan's pride had spilled into his children's world, and they were absorbing his version of the story. I took a long breath, then wrote back to Ava that she had done nothing wrong, that I loved her, that grown-ups sometimes make mistakes and say things they should not, and that none of this was her fault. I told her I was proud of her and her brother, and that nothing she or Max ever did would make me stop being their aunt. After sending the message, I sat quietly, realizing that the next move was not just about boundaries or accounts, but about making sure the children understood that love could exist without conditions, even if their father tried to convince them otherwise. And so, while Ethan continued to panic and posture, I made peace with the fact that my role in this family was no longer to fix things for him, but to shield the children from becoming collateral damage in the war he was waging against reality. What I did not know yet was how far he would go to reclaim control, or how desperate he would become once the holidays arrived and I refused to be the invisible scaffolding holding his house upright. The next step, I realized, would define whether this was simply a boundary or the beginning of a complete fracture, because when children start asking questions, the house of lies their parents built begins to wobble. And Ethan was about to discover that no amount of laughter about ruining the vibe could cover the sound of truth breaking through the walls. The week of the holiday finally arrived with the same mix of forced cheer and quiet dread that has followed our family gatherings since we all learned to slap smiles over unfinished fights. And my mother called in the morning with a tremble in her voice that made me picture her clutching the calendar like it could force peace into existence, because she said that for the sake of appearances and for the children's memories, she wanted me seated at the table. And she promised there would be no jokes and no digs and no references to ruined vibes, only food and music and a photo to prove we were all still related. Yet the truth was simple, and I said it plainly. That I would not loan my presence to a story where I existed as a prop who makes the picture look whole while the reality rots underneath, and that if anyone wanted a family, then they could start with respect, not with a camera. She went quiet for a long breath, then asked whether I would at least stop by for dessert so that Ava and Max could see me, and I said I would see them within the week, that I would make time just for them, and that today I was declining the performance. And when she sighed and told me I was making things harder, I reminded her that nothing is harder than pretending to be welcome in a place that proved you are not. Which ended the conversation without fireworks, but with finality that felt like a door sliding into its frame. I had already decided that silence alone was not the ending I wanted, because silence can be rewritten by anyone with a louder voice, so I printed a letter I had drafted in calm language that even the angriest person would have trouble twisting. And I sealed it in an envelope addressed to Ethan and Kelly with their names written in the same straightforward hand I used on bill payments when I still believed covering a balance could also cover the pattern that caused it, and I scheduled a courier drop so it would land on their doorstep mid-afternoon. long before anyone could use the excuse of a busy kitchen to pretend they had not seen it. And then I turned off my phone and left it on my dresser because I wanted the message to work without my heartbeat wobbling at every vibration. In the letter I wrote that I would not be attending because I had outgrown being the person invited only when convenient and excluded when honest, that I had removed myself from every account and discount and automatic safety net that allowed two adults to live inside a story where bills paid themselves and emergencies always had my face. And that my decision was permanent unless and until Ethan made a single sincere apology in writing for the holiday insult and for the years of taking framed as jokes. And I added that after that apology we could meet in a neutral place to discuss new rules with clear responsibilities, not as siblings looking for a referee, but as grown-ups drafting a plan. I also wrote about the children in a way that required no performance from their parents, because I included copies of the custodial account documents that showed the funds were real and locked, with the rules spelled out in full sentences even a judge would appreciate. And I explained that nothing in those accounts could be withdrawn by Ethan or Kelly, and that any attempt to persuade the children to hand over cards or access would result in an immediate freeze and a call to the bank's fraud department. And then I made the most important promise of the day, which was that I would continue to deposit a modest amount each month and would increase contributions for true emergencies like medical care or school costs if needed, but only through verified channels that did not rely on Ethan's word or Kelly's panic. I finished the letter with a line that did not threaten and did not beg, a line that simply told the truth, that disrespect is a choice and so is consequence, and that I was no longer negotiating my worth at tables where I had to earn a chair. When the courier confirmed delivery, I was already walking to meet a friend for a late lunch, because I had decided that the best revenge was not a dramatic speech on a doorstep or a public scene that would give Ethan a new story to tell about my instability, but a day where my life moved forward without checking his temperature every hour. So we ate, and we talked about ordinary things, and I let my body learn the feeling of making plans that did not orbit around anyone else's emergencies. It was evening when I finally turned on my phone, and the first messages were exactly what I expected. A hail of texts from Ethan that swung between injured pride and oily reason, claiming he never meant the holiday comment and that I had misread the room. Then accusing me of theatrical cruelty for sending a letter like a lawyer, then bargaining for a temporary restart of the streaming and the phone discount because the kids were fragile right now, as if children should be taught that love looks like access to an aunt's accounts rather than access to parents who show up for their responsibilities. I did not respond to him, because the letter had already said everything and because arguing would only feed the machine that turns my time into a spotlight. But a few minutes later a quieter message arrived from Kelly, and I opened it because she had at least tried to speak plainly all month, and she wrote that she had read the documents, that she understood I was serious, that she was scared but grateful for the protection set aside for the children, and that she had shown the letter to Ethan and told him she would not support any attempt to smear me to the family again because the evidence spoke for itself and because the apology I asked for was not humiliating but adult. I thanked her for saying it out loud, and I told her that when Ava and Max asked why I was not at dinner, she could say the grown-ups were fixing a mistake, and that sometimes love looks like holding a line until it becomes a doorway. Near midnight, long after plates had been scraped clean and someone had posted that classic forced smile photo to the family thread, a final message hit my inbox that I read twice before I believed it. And it was short enough to fit on a single screen yet heavy enough to change the air in my chest, because Ethan wrote that he was sorry for the holiday comment and sorry for years of taking, that he understood the money and the perks were not owed, that he had used my reliability as an excuse to avoid becoming reliable himself, and that if I was still willing to meet after the holidays he wanted to talk about a plan for their budget and a schedule for pickups and a list of tasks he would handle without calling me. There was no blame, no sarcasm, no jokes, just the kind of sentence that cannot be faked because it does not try to win, it tries to repair. I sat with it for a long time and then typed my reply, which promised nothing more than what I had already offered, that I would accept One sincere apology one time, that I would meet in a public place in the new year with printed rules we would both sign, that any slide back into mockery would end our experiment without discussion, and that until then my boundary would hold. I ended the night with one more small act that mattered only to me, which was writing a card to Ava and another to Max that I would deliver when I saw them that week. Cards that said their aunt loved them and believed in their futures and would always cheer for their efforts. Not their parents' excuses, and then I turned off the light and felt something I had not felt in years, a clean satisfaction that did not depend on anyone else admitting I was right, because the win was not the apology or the letter or the frozen cartoon. It was the quiet knowledge that I had changed the rules without screaming, that I had protected the children without feeding the fire, and that I had finally stepped out of the role of family utility and into the role of a woman who knows her worth and acts accordingly. Which is the kind of ending that does not fade when the holiday lights come down but grows stronger every time someone thinks about making a joke and remembers the cost.